We all think we know the story of David, the giant slayer, right? The shepherd boy who becomes this legendary king. But do you know the story of David at his absolute lowest? I'm talking about a moment so dark, so completely devastating, it almost broke him. And yet, that very moment was the secret key that unlocked his path to the throne.
So let me just ask you this. What if the road to your greatest promise runs right through your deepest pain? Today, we're going to dive into one of the most intense, most transformative stories in the Bible, one you might have just skimmed over, the tragedy and the incredible triumph that happened in a place called Ziklag. All right, to really get this, you have to understand the timeline. David gets anointed by the prophet Samuel when he's just a kid, about 15 years old. The promise is made, you are going to be king. But that promise, it came with a huge, shocking delay. A full 15 years would go by before he was actually crowned. And those years, they weren't spent in a palace learning how to rule. Oh no, they were spent as a fugitive, literally running for his life in the wilderness. Yeah, almost immediately after getting this incredible divine promise, David's life just implodes. He's forced to flee from King Saul, who's now insanely jealous and sees him as a threat. So he spends the next decade plus on the run, gathering this band of loyal but pretty desperate men around him. So eventually, to get away from Saul, David makes this really risky move. He takes his 600 men and they go seek refuge with their sworn enemies, the Philistines. And the Philistine king actually gives them a city to live in, a place called Ziklag. And for a little while, it probably felt like a safe haven, a place to finally, catch their breath. But this place of safety, it's about to become the stage for his greatest test ever. So picture this. David and his men are coming back from a journey, they're approaching their new home. But as they get closer, they can probably smell the smoke. They realize something is terribly, terribly wrong. Instead of seeing their families waving, they are met with a sight of absolute horror. The entire city, gone, raided and torched. Everything they had built, their one little spot of refuge in a hostile world, is just smoking ruins. It's total devastation. But that initial shock is about to get so much worse. Their wives, their sons, their daughters, every single one of them is gone, captured by the raiding party. The Bible in 1 Samuel says they wept until they had no strength left to weep. Can you even imagine that? That feeling of just utter gut-wrenching despair. And right there, in that moment of shared grief, things take a very dangerous turn for David. His own men, the guys who had followed him through thick and thin, they turn on him. They're so consumed by grief, they just need someone to blame. And all eyes turn to David. The scripture says the people were so bitter in soul, they actually started talking about stoning him. This is rock bottom. He's lost his home, his family, and now even the loyalty of his closest friends. He is completely and utterly alone. And this is the moment that changes everything. When every single human support system you have is ripped away, what do? David has lost everything he could possibly rely on in this world. This is the moment that's going to define whether he's truly fit to be a king or not. Here we see two completely different paths. The natural human reaction is what his men felt: despair, pointing fingers, wanting revenge. But in this critical make-or-break moment, David makes a conscious spiritual choice to respond differently. Instead of just collapsing under the weight of it all, he turns inward and he turns upward. This single line from 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 6, is one of the most powerful in David's whole story. It says, "But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God." At his absolute weakest, with literally no one left to encourage him, David makes an active decision to draw strength from the only source that hadn't failed him. This is the hinge on which his entire destiny turns. So what's the first thing he does with this renewed strength? He doesn't just start shouting orders or rush off in a blind rage, no. His first action is to seek guidance. He calls for the priest to bring the ephod, which was a sacred garment they used to ask God for direction. And he asks this simple, direct question, which we find in 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 8. "Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them?" Notice he's not telling God what he wants to do, he's asking God what he should do. This shows a complete shift from relying on his own strategy to relying completely on God's direction. He's ready to listen. And guess what? God answers. The response is immediate, it's clear, and it sets in motion this incredible comeback story. And this isn't just about getting his stuff back, it's about proving the power of what happens when you act in faith. So the result is just incredible. God gives him a clear command. Pursue, for you shall surely overtake them and without fail recover all. Filled with that divine confidence, David rallies his men, and they give chase. They find the enemy, they attack, and it's a total victory. And the outcome is a perfect fulfillment of God's promise. They recover every single person, every single item. Nothing was missing.
But what David does next is just as important. He takes all the extra spoils of war and he sends gifts to the elders of Judah, the very people he's about to rule. See, he doesn't just restore his own little group. He starts to restore the entire community. This isn't the act of a desperate fugitive anymore. This is the act of a kin.
So what does all this mean? Well, Ziklag wasn't just some random horrible tragedy. It was a spiritual training ground. It was the final, brutal exam David had to pass before he could finally take the throne. And get this, while scholars debate the exact meaning of the name Ziklag, one of the most compelling interpretations is that it means pressed down or crushed. I mean, how fitting is that? Ziklag was literally the place where David was emotionally, spiritually, and physically crushed, pressed down to his absolute limits. It was his baptism by fire. It burned away all his self-reliance, his dependence on what other people thought, and his trust in his own strength. When everything he had trusted in was turned to ash, he was forced to find the one thing that was truly unshakable. So, in the end, this whole ordeal taught David 3 critical lessons he needed for kingship. First, that when everyone and everything else fails you, true strength is found in God alone. Second, that a true leader asks God for direction before they act. And finally, that real restoration isn't just about you, it's meant to be shared, to bless and build up the entire community. This trial forged him into the king God needed him to be.
And that really reveals the core lesson of David's entire journey, doesn't it? The throne wasn't something he could just grab for himself through ambition or skill. I mean, he had chances to kill Saul and take it, but he always refused. Kingship had to be granted by God, and it was only granted after this period of intense refinement, after he proved he would rely solely on God's strength and God's timing. So we end right back where we started. We all face our own Ziklags, those moments where we feel crushed, where everything we rely on seems to be burning to the ground. And in those moments, this story asks us a really profound question. Where will you find your strength? Because what David's darkest hour teaches us is that serving God isn't about avoiding the fire. It's about discovering that his strength is actually made perfect in our weakness. And it's that total reliance on him that truly prepares us for our throne. Hey, thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. If this story connected with you, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe, and definitely turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive. We'll see you next time.